The Honda Civic has always been a more interesting choice for buyers in the focus-sized family hatchback segment. This completely new version is the 10th generation model and has 40 years of heritage to build upon. There's a more spacious, dynamic-looking body, stronger standards of safety and media connectivity, and perhaps most importantly, two completely fresh petrol engines. It all sounds quite promising.
Honda is a bit different from your average automotive maker, but being different doesn't always put you in a very profitable place. Take this car, the Honda Civic. For years now, this model line has offered something unique in the family hatchback segment, but it's done so with too many drawbacks to sell the sort of numbers the Japanese maker needs to see. And we're told that this completely redesigned 10th generation version deals with the previous issues while remaining distinctively Honda. That is asking a lot. Compact, versatile models of this kind have always been closest to the heart of company founder Soichiro Honda. Back in the 60s, when the best the motor industry could offer a small family was something like a lumbering Morris Oxford, it was he who pioneered the idea of a compact, fuel and space-efficient family car with a high-tech air-cooled flat-4 1300cc engine. It was thinking that led to the launch of the original Civic in 1972, a model series that over the next 40 years would go on to sell over 20 million cars around the world, over 650,000 of those here in the UK. Throughout the decades, there have been so many reasons why people like us have wanted to recommend the Civic. The most recent versions we've seen, the 8th generation design of 2006 and the replacement 9th generation model of 2011, both offered distinctive styling, sporty engines, a wonderfully slick gearbox, clever magic seating practicality and a unique driver-centric dash. If only the ride refinement, the cabin quality and the running costs had been better. If only the lifeless power steering hadn't disguised the responsive handling. If only the pricing had been a bit more competitive. You can't afford if-onlys the way the Focus class segment is at present, and Honda knew it had to do better. So the company set out on an enormous development program, a 7-year project that's seen creation of this 10th generation Civic take up more time, more effort and more money than any other model in Honda's history. Apart from the engines used in the Type R hot hatch and the diesel variants, which everyone liked anyway, absolutely everything else about this car is completely new, starting with a bigger platform that's made this a larger car and which has offered up the chance for a completely new exterior look. Now, that styling is slightly controversial, but everyone agrees that the redesigned cabin, the sophisticated rear multi-link suspension and the downsized 1 litre and 1.5 litre VTEC turbo engines are a big step forward. In short, on paper at least, this Civic has been rejuvenated. Time to put it to the test. Okay, 3 things that you need to know about the 10th generation Honda Civic when it comes to the on-the-road experience. First, the mainstream petrol engines are at last bang up to date. Second, the suspension is much more sophisticated. And third, the body it's bolted to is vastly stiffer and more rigid in a bid to create the kind of refinement and drive dynamics you'd expect in a much larger car. Promising set of headlines then. Let's scratch a little below the surface. We have to start with the engines because they're so different from what went before. Gone are the normally aspirated 1.4 and 1.8 litre iVTEC units developed back at the turn of the century, which sounded charismatic but were inefficient and had to be revved hard before they delivered much performance. In their place, provided a couple of VTEC turbo power plants, a 3-cylinder 1 litre engine developing 129 PS and the 4-cylinder 1.5 litre 182 PS variant that we're trying here. Now, this isn't Honda's first experience with forced induction petrol power. The 310 PS 2 litre engine used in the previous generation Civic Type R hot hatch also used it. Understandably then, much of that power plant's technology has been used in the creation of these two downsized units. Essentially, that's been all about maximising the benefits of a turbo without diluting the advantages of the VTEC valve timing electronic control system that's distinguished Honda engines since the 90s. Now, that's meant the installation of a much more compact mono-scroll turbocharger than rival engines use, with a small diameter turbine that gets going almost as soon as you brush the throttle. Now, you particularly notice that in the 1 litre unit that most Civic buyers will choose. Some rival downsized three-cylinder engines, well, they seem to give you almost nothing when you first accelerate away, and then a second later the car lurches forward as all the available power kicks in. It's not like that in this Honda. Throttle pickup is smooth right from the get-go, building, if you have the road space, to deliver the kind of pleasant VTEC surge at around 4,000 RPM that long-time Civic owners will remember. That's the kind of thing that we thought, perhaps we expected, might have been lost in the transition to these new engines. For us, the way all of this works is more important than the ultimate performance figures it generates. But if you are interested in those, let's tell you that the 1 litre model makes 62 miles an hour from rest in 10.4 seconds en route to 126 miles an hour. On paper, this 1.5 litre 4-cylinder variant looks significantly faster, reducing the 62 miles an hour sprint time to 8.2 seconds. In practice, though, the performance difference between the two engines actually feels quite slight, as you'd expect it might be, given that the larger unit's 240 Nm torque output gives you just 40 Nm more pulling power than the base engine can muster up. We'd save our money and stick with the much more affordable 1 litre option. Either way, you'll be offered the chance to specify a CVT automatic gearbox, and it's certainly better than most belt-driven autos of its kind, but it does still struggle when you need instant ultimate acceleration. If that isn't a good enough reason to ignore it, then the slick excellence of the standard redesigned 6-speed manual stick shift may well be. If you're wondering about diesel power, well, yes, you can have that too. Honda having decided to carry over the 120 PS iD-Tech 1.6 litre unit used in the previous generation model with only minor changes. So, as before, that diesel will put at around 300 Nm of torque and power you to 62 mph in just over 10 seconds and keep going until nearly 130 miles an hour. Essentially, it wasn't broke and Honda hasn't fixed it. The same applies to the 2 litre petrol engine used in the flagship Type R hot hatch, although here power has been optimised, which is the Japanese maker's way of saying it's gone up by 10 PS to 320 PS in total. Now, this shopping rocket model's ultimate performance figures, though, remain much as before. Rest to 62 mph flashes by in just 5.7 seconds en route to a maximum of 169 miles an hour. Enough with the engines, let's touch on those two other areas of engineering enhancement that are referenced at the beginning. Improvements that make such a difference to the way that this 10th generation Civic model drives. Now, first and foremost, let's tell you that this model once again has a properly sophisticated suspension package. Now, we say once again because the rear multi-link system in question was actually fitted to the 7th generation Civic that the brand launched back at the turn of the century, but it was later dumped on the 8th and 9th generation models because it impinged on interior space. A change in the cabin configuration has allowed room for the reintroduction of this setup, and the result is a vast improvement in the quality of ride over poor surfaces. This car just cruises over potholes that its direct predecessors would have crashed through, and it does so with the demeanour of a much larger, much more luxurious model. The adaptive damping system, introduced on the rear axle of the old Civic Tourer estate, comes as standard with the plushest trim levels, and this time works on the front axle too, offering a dynamic setting that's supposed to firm things up when you're feeling sporty. To be honest though, we've not been able to feel very much difference with this theoretically sharper mode selected. In other words, don't worry too much if your chosen Civic spec doesn't have it. Of much more importance are the changes made to the structure of this car, all enabled by a completely new and significantly larger platform that's a full 52% stiffer than before and positioned 10mm lower to the ground to improve the centre of gravity. All that has simply got to make a significant difference, and sure enough, the grip and body control you get with this 10th generation model is a significant improvement over what was served up before, further contributing to that big car feel we referenced earlier. The steering steering is direct and responsive too, although it does lack the final nth of feel that sets the rival Ford Focus apart from its rivals in that regard. What else? Well, this Honda's easy to manoeuvre around town, although it does have a slightly larger turning circle than some of its rivals. At highway speeds, road and wind noise is more noticeable than it would be in, say, a rival Golf, but Honda has narrowed the gap to the class leader in that regard, thanks primarily to the stiffer structure. What hasn't changed with this car is the way it feels so driver-centric right from the moment you set off in it. The perfectly positioned seat and pedals help here. So does the manner in which the gear lever falls beautifully to hand, and the way in which the futuristic dash delivers everything you need to know in perfect line of sight. As the miles roll by, you'll also be struck by the near perfect weighting and smoothness of the brake and clutch pedals, and, we'll say it again, the lovely snickety precision of the 6-speed gearbox. In short, you don't need an expensively powerful engine to feel fast in this car, which is one of the things we like most about it. Check out the on-paper stats of this 10th generation Civic and you'll find that in almost every respect it's conformed at last to conventional family hatchback expectations. Every respect, that is, except one, and you're looking at it. The styling, just about the only part of this car created in Japan rather than Europe, remains unique, divisive and charismatic. For us, it is a look that's trying a bit too hard to be different, but we find the unusual approach refreshing in a sea of Golf segment conformity. Whether it will help Honda's objectives for this car to become a more mainstream class contender is another question, and we suspect not. The reason we have this fresh design is because the brand decided this Mark 10 model needed an all-new platform. Not surprisingly, given that the last one was developed back at the turn of the century. Now, it's bigger because Honda no longer sells its Mondeo-sized Accord, so this Civic has to appeal to a wider cross-section of buyers. And it's not especially European-looking because the Japanese maker has decided on one global shape this time around instead of the previous policy, which saw each Civic's chosen design gently restyled in different regions to try to suit continental preferences across the world. Essentially, what we've ended up with are aggressive aesthetics that see every version adopt the kind of bodywork flourishes that might ordinarily be reserved for a hot hatch. Most notably, perhaps, these deeply scooped front corner intake panels that sit below thin, high-tech front headlight clusters that feature hockey stick-shaped LED daytime running light embellishment. Stepping around to the side, you get a feeling for the different dimensions adopted this time around for this 5-door hatchback body shape. This is the only one we're going to get. The door handle bisecting body contour line emphasises this car's substantial 136mm increase in length over its direct predecessor. And that's something that the designers have tried unsuccessfully to disguise by reducing the roof height by 20 mils for a sportier stance. Larger 16, 17 or 18-inch wheels and short overhangs aim to accentuate the wider stance, plus this upward sweeping lower panel crease and the way that the window line kicks up towards the rear further add to the purposeful demeanour. All of that's quite nice. Perhaps this car's most controversial angle, though, is here at the rear, where again, deeply scalloped black lower corner intake panels dominate, flanked in each case by narrow vertical reflectors. Now, it's the kind of thing that works quite well with the machismo of the Type R hot hatch model, but it might look a little bit odd in suburbia. Still, it certainly emphasises the way this car has grown by 20mm in width this time around, which gives the perspective of a much larger Mondeo-sized model when you're following behind. This integrated lower window spoiler that flows out of the rear light clusters, that's one of the few design cues carried over from the previous generation Civics, and this so-called floating higher roof spoiler completes the dynamic effect. Of course, as usual, what's more important is the stuff that you can't see, the all-new platform delivering a 16kg weight saving and simply massive structural improvements, a 52% increase in torsional rigidity and a whopping 88% increase in lateral stiffness. Time to take a seat behind the wheel, where there's far more conformity to class convention than there was outside. Although, not to the point that you'd feel you were sitting in anything other than a Honda. In some ways, that's a good thing. The placement of the wheel, the pedals and the gear stick, that's something quite a few manufacturers could learn from. And in some ways, it isn't. The quality of fit and finish, although it is much improved, still isn't in the golf category. And even some lesser brands competing in this class managed to shade this Civic when it comes to the creation of a plush, slush-moulded, upmarket ambience. Fake plastic stitching, that's never a good look. Still, the changes that have been made amount to a significant step forward over what was offered before, and if you like your driving, then you'll appreciate the way this seat has been positioned 35mm lower to the ground this time around, which does wonders in furthering the sporty feel that's promised by that swept-back styling. Probably the main point we need to be making, though, is the change in design approach that's been taken here. Gone are the unusual split-level instruments and the driver-focused asymmetrical fascia. Now, these things pleased loyal owners of the two most recent generation models, but they alienated those who didn't want their daily family conveyance to feel like a motor show concept car. Instead, you now view a relatively conventionally styled instrument binnacle through this grippy three-spoke wheel, although closer inspection reveals that the middle dial is actually a TFT LCD screen flanked by stylized digital temperature and fuel gauges. That central display replicates an analog rev counter, it incorporates a digital speedo readout, and it can also build in selectable infotainment features, navigation instructions, audio settings, and trip computer info, for example. You just click these steering wheel buttons to access what you want. Anything this can't tell you will be covered off by this 7-inch centre dash infotainment screen. Now, this is a revised version of the Honda Connect setup that was introduced into later versions of the previous generation model. If you can stretch beyond SE trim, that's the starting point for most customers in the lineup, this setup is provided as standard. It comes complete with Garmin satellite navigation, internet browsing capability, a reversing camera, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto phone mirroring connectivity, and a DAB audio system with at least 8 speakers. You can also download your favourite apps into this Connect setup via the Honda App Center, and one of those, Aha, comes preloaded with the system, and it gives you access to thousands of stations of audio spanning everything from music to news, podcasts and audiobooks, plus social media and location-based services. So it's all good, or at least it would be if the screen selections weren't so slow to activate, the graphics were better, and there was a proper knob to operate the audio volume. This time around, Honda's built climate control functionality into the screen too, although fortunately some key ventilation dials and buttons have been retained just below the monitor. Look further down the dash and you'll find an area in front of the gear lever that incorporates a phone charging mat on plusher models. You can also run leads neatly out of the back of this cubby into an easy-to-miss second lower storage area that's concealed behind the centre stack. Now here, HDMI, USB and 12-volt ports are provided, so you can charge your devices out of the sight of prying eyes. More storage is provided by this deep bin between the seats that incorporates a sliding armrest, a cup holder and a USB socket. There's no overhead compartment for your sunglasses. The door pockets are a bit small, but the glove box is decently sized and it includes a useful retaining strap inside. What else? Well, if you come to this model fresh from its direct predecessor, you should feel it to be more spacious in here. There's 10mm more shoulder room and 30mm more room between the seats. And these seats boast considerably more adjustment range, both in terms of height and fore and aft travel. As for all-round visibility, well, thinner A-pillars and a lower set bonnet certainly aid that when you're looking forward. The hood has actually been lowered by a full 65mm. Unfortunately, though, that coupe-like rear styling inevitably compromises rearward vision when you're parking. Although, in Honda's defence, we would say that the low-level rear spoiler impedes vision far less than was the case on the previous generation Civic model. And it certainly further helps that virtually all models get standard rear parking sensors. Time to take a seat in the rear. Now, earlier we were talking about this 10th generation Civic's move to conformity with more usual family hatchback customer expectations. And here's another example of that. These rear door handles that are now provided conventionally along the bodywork shoulder line rather than being hidden further up in the window frame. As for getting in, well, this Mark 10 model's 20mm reduction in roof height and these coupe-style rear C-pillars don't prove to be as much of an impediment as we thought they might be. Taller folk might feel the effect of that lower roof line once inside, though, and those over 6 foot will find their hair brushing against the ceiling. In every other regard, though, this rear cabin is a vast spatial improvement over what was provided before, as you might expect would be the case given that the wheelbase is 30mm lengthier this time around. There's 45mm more room for your knees and a full 95mm more space for your legs. As a result, there's probably more room back here than in any other Focus segment contender bar Skoda's Octavia. Unfortunately, that sloping roofline and the way the rear side windows pinch in diminishes the feeling of space you would otherwise get. This prominent centre transmission tunnel doesn't help either, which is a pity because if it was lower, you might be able to get 3 adults across the back here with some basic degree of comfort, thanks to this model's 20mm increase in shoulder room. A fold-down centre armrest with twin cup holders is provided, but the pair of centre rear vents you get on some rivals are absent. Now, also missing, much to our disappointment, is the magic seat functionality that on the Mark 8 and Mark 9 Civic models allowed you to pull up the seat base, cinema seat style, for the easy transport of taller items. The adoption of multi-link rear suspension and the associated resituation of the fuel tank from its previous position beneath the front seats to a place beneath these rear ones spelt the end of that magic seat layout. Cello playing and garden centre visiting Civic owners across the country will, like us, regret its passing. And they'll wonder perhaps whether the extra length of this Mark 10 model's platform might not have enabled Honda's design team to engineer in a sliding and reclining rear seat as some sort of compensation. As it is, there's nothing of that sort provided. So let's finish by taking a look in the boot, where first impressions are good. The tailgate's light to lift and it opens to reveal a large aperture that's complemented by a usefully low sill height. The sloping rear glazing slightly reduces loading height this time around. It's now down to 770mm, but despite that, total load capacity measures in at an impressive 478 litres in most models. That again leaves this Honda second only to Skoda's Octavia in this segment. This is just as well, given that the brand has no plans to reintroduce the previous Tourer Estate body style. Do bear in mind, though, that if you choose one of the 1.5-litre VTEC Turbo Sport models, your Civic will come with a dual exhaust setup that'll reduce that capacity to 420 litres. Someone should have thought about that a bit more. But someone has thought about this, this clever side retracting parcel shelf, the cassette for which can be positioned on either side of the cargo area. It works in concert with a fabric panel that clips in on the inside of the rear hatch and means that you don't have to have the usual moulded shelf that you'd need to take out every time it's necessary to carry a really bulky item. Now, this is a feature that other brands are bound to copy, and when they do, we'd like to see extendable material that doesn't crease and rough up so easily when you pull it out at an angle. If you need more space, this concertina-ing boot floor folds back to reveal a useful lower compartment, although room for this is only possible because Honda, like so many of its segment rivals, declines to supply this car as standard with any sort of space-saver spare wheel. If you do need ultimate carriage capacity, pushing forward the 60/40 split-folding rear bench reveals a flat cargo area with up to 1,267 litres of total capacity. This time around, Honda's focusing on their single 5-door body style. At launch, the emphasis was on the 2 all-new VTEC petrol engines introduced with this generation model, with the entry-level 1-litre 129 PS unit priced in the £18,000 to £25,000 bracket. If you want the pokier 1.5-litre 182 PS power plant, you'll need to be budgeting in the £22,500 to £28,000 bracket. In both cases, there's the option of a CVT automatic gearbox for a premium of £1,400. Want to pay the slight premium necessary to get yourself a diesel? Well, for that, you're going to need to ask your dealer about the mildly reworked 120 PS 1.6 litre ID Tech unit that was developed for this car. At the top of the range lies the 5-door Civic Type R hot hatch, which is priced from £31,000 and is powered by a potent 320 PS 2-litre VTEC turbo unit. In our market, we're not being offered the saloon and coupe Civic body styles that are being built at the Civic factory in Britain for export to countries like the US. On to the value proposition those figures represent. The 1.5-litre VTEC turbo variants seem a little optimistically priced. The brand points to high equipment levels as justification for that. But otherwise, the figures being asked seem very competitive. Honda wants this car to be considered by the kind of customers who will normally be thinking about family of hatch segment heavy hitters like VW's Golf, Ford's Focus and Vauxhall's Astra. And price-wise, it seems well placed to take those rivals on. Honda's list figures are slightly undercut by those of an Astra, but they'll typically see you paying around £800 to £1,500 less than you probably have to find for a directly comparable Golf or Focus. We think, though, that it's more likely that potential Civic buyers will come from the ranks of people wanting something a little different in this segment and who are looking at popular choices like Peugeot's 308, Renault's Megane, Hyundai's i30, Seat's Leon, Citroën C4 and Skoda's Octavia. Now, nearly all of these rivals can undercut Honda's pricing by around £1,000 in list price terms, but it's probably nothing you couldn't negotiate way around if you really wanted to. If you are prepared to further widen your options in this segment, the same sort of budget that's required for this Civic would get you certain versions of the Mazda 3 that directly compete, but you'd probably need a couple of thousand more to get yourself into a comparable Toyota Auris or Mini Clubman. The only other family hatchback options you could consider reside in the really cheap area of this segment. So in rough model terms, you could save as much as £2,500 or so if you were going to choose, say, an equivalent Fiat Tipo, and maybe up to double that if you were prepared to consider an equivalent Nissan Pulsar. Honda would argue, with some validity, that you get a lot less sophistication with much cheaper family hatchback models of that sort. They're banking on the expectation that most potential buyers will be prepared to stump up a little more to get something a little nicer. Something like this. Enough on price and market comparisons. Let's assume that you've decided on a mainstream Civic model and you want to know exactly what's going to be included for your money. Well, a pretty reasonable amount as it happens. Bear in mind that the trim levels available for the 1 litre and 1.5 litre petrol models are completely different. So let's start with the options available to the majority of folk who want the 1 litre VTEC unit. There is an entry S level of trim, but we can't imagine why any private customer would ever choose that, given that the equipment provided is so relatively sparse. I mean, you don't even get a radio, and that just £100 more will get you into the vastly better specified SE variant. For the record, though, we'll tell you that the S trim gives you LED daytime running lights, auto headlamps, powered mirrors, an alarm and all-round powered windows. Plus, you still get the extremely comprehensive roster of camera-driven electronic safety equipment that we'll cover in detail in a few moments. For nearly all private customers, though, the starting point in their perusal of the possibilities of Civic ownership will start with SE trim, at which point you get the niceties that most potential buyers will be expecting. So things like 18-inch alloy wheels, front and rear parking sensors, and a DAB 8-speaker 180-watt audio system with USB and Bluetooth connectivity. There's also climate-controlled air conditioning and the steering wheel audio controls, the rear wiper, and the heated mirrors that the base model does without. The next step up in the Civic lineup is the SR variant that delivers a sportier look and feel thanks to 17-inch alloy wheels, rear privacy glass, body-coloured power-folding mirrors, alloy pedals and leather trim for the wheel and the gear knob. At this level you also get a rear parking camera, power-adjusted lumbar support for the driver's seat, auto wipers, special ambient lighting and the Honda Connect 7-inch centre dash touchscreen that comes complete with navigation, web access and Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto phone mirroring connectivity. Now, if you want to go further, plusher EX trim gives you full leather seats that are heated up front, keyless entry, a glass roof, an auto-dimming rear-view mirror, LED front fog lights, adaptive damping, and an 11-speaker 449-watt audio system. Here, though, we've opted for the Pokia 182 PS 1.5 litre VTEC petrol unit. And that's an engine available with 3 plush trim options: Sport, Sport Plus, and as here, Prestige. Or get the nicer features fitted to the better equipped 1 litre models. So things like 17-inch alloy wheels, rear parking camera, auto headlamps and wipers, all-round parking sensors, LED front fog lights, and an 8-speaker audio setup incorporated into that Honda Connect infotainment system. Sport Plus trim adds heated front seats, keyless entry, a wireless charging mat for your phone, adaptive damping, and a powered glass roof. This top Prestige variant builds on that with full leather trim, rear heated seats, and a bit of chromed exterior embellishment. Enough with that. What about the extra cost features you could choose, regardless of your choice of engine? Well, on a car so obviously styled to try and please, perhaps we should start with aesthetic options. There are 6 metallic paint shades in addition to the standard solid rally red, plus there's a choice of some really eye-catching 17 and 18-inch wheels. Alternatively, you could go for the black line or orange line styling packs. Now they're made up of front and side skirts, a rear diffuser, and mirror caps in a dark gloss or tangerine shade. You can also add in aluminium sports pedals and a tailgate spoiler if you want to replicate the look of the range-topping Type R model. If practical features are of greater importance, well, you might want the cargo pack. This gives you rubber mats for the cabin, a boot sill protector, and a boot tray with dividers. Plus, you could order a windshield cover, a dog guard, a roof box, and a rear cycle carrier that attaches to either a fixed or a detachable tow bar. And there are smart elegance floor mats that also come as part of a premium pack. And that additionally includes door sill trims, front and rear mud guards, and a boot step protector. As for comfort-orientated items, well, a wireless phone charging mat will keep your handset topped up on the move. Honda's 3D sound system gives you concert hall style cabin sound, and tablet holders that clip onto the back of the front head restraints will keep the kids amused on those long trips. For completion, let's tell you also that if you've opted for a trim level including leather seats, you can swap the standard black hide upholstery for lighter ivory coloured leather. And there's also an illumination pack, and that will bathe the interior in subtle blue or red light. And buyers opting for EX trim will be offered a technology pack, and that includes wireless phone charging mat, heated rear seats, LED front fog lights, and headlight washers. Right, what about safety equipment? Well, this is a real Civic strong point thanks to their standard inclusion on every model of the Honda sensing package of camera-driven features. There are 8 features to be exact, which together make this arguably the safest car in its segment. So let's talk you through them. Autonomous braking is rapidly becoming a must-have inclusion on cars in this segment. Honda calls it set up a collision mitigation braking system, and as usual with this sort of thing, there's a camera that scans the road ahead looking for potential accident hazards as you drive. And now, if one's detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond, or perhaps you aren't able to, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Also helping here is a forward collision warning that lets you know if you're getting too close to the car in front. So that's 2 of the Honda sensing camera-driven safety features fitted to every Civic. What about the 6 others? Well, lane departure warning, road departure mitigation, and a lane keeping assist system all help you to stay within your lane on the highway. Then there's traffic sign recognition. That's there to picture signs as you pass and then display them on the dash. And intelligent speed assistance, which when set can adjust your speed to the limit indicated by the last speed sign you passed. Finally, there's intelligent adaptive cruise control. That's a setup not only able to adapt your highway speed to suit prevailing traffic flow, but one that can also react to other vehicles cutting in front of you. In addition to all this, as you'd expect, the basics of safety provision are properly accounted for. The very stiff, strong and rigid new platform incorporates what Honda calls ACE, or Advanced Compatibility Engineering Body Design, which employs a network of connected structural elements to distribute crash energy more evenly and to reduce the forces transferred into the passenger cell in the event of an impact. In addition, should you ever have such a crash, clever crash stroke technology uses a neat hinge design on the front frame to direct the engine down and rearwards, which adds an extra 80 millimetres of energy absorbing protection to the front of the vehicle, and that further helps to minimise cabin intrusion. In other words, passenger safety in modern automotive design is about a lot more than just sticking in a few airbags. But, of course, this Civic gets those too, twin front, side and curtain bags, although no knee bags provided. Plus, you get all kinds of electronic acronyms to hopefully ensure that you'll never have to use them. So there's Agile Handling Assist, and that helps with corner turn-in, and Vehicle Stability Assist. That's Honda's version of the kind of ESC stability control system that you would now expect on a car of this kind. Also part of the course is an ABS braking setup with emergency braking assist to aid in panic stops, and those will be advertised to following motorists by automatically activating brake and hazard warning lights. Other standard safety features include hill start assist to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, active front head restraints to minimise accident whiplash, and ISOFIX child seat fastenings. Plus there's tyre pressure monitoring and a front end section of the car designed to minimise pedestrian injuries. Want more? Well, we'll mention that the Plusher EX, Sport Plus and Prestige trim levels gain two further camera-driven features. Blind spot information works on the move to stop you from dangerously pulling out to overtake if there's a vehicle in your blind spot. And the cross-traffic monitor lets you know if vehicles are approaching as you reverse out of a bay. Independency of thought is one of those things we've always admired about Honda, but sometimes you just have to get with what everyone else is doing. The Japanese brand resisted the need to move to downsized three-cylinder engines for longer than just about every other manufacturer, relying on its VTEC power plant technology to keep efficiency figures competitive, but it just wasn't enough. The three-cylinder entry-level petrol engines used by top players in the family hatchback sector now routinely deliver close to 60 mpg on the combined cycle and CO2 emissions of well under 110 grams per kilometre, figures that the old 9th generation Civic's 4-cylinder 1.4 litre iVTEC unit just couldn't get near. Hence the urgent need for the 3-cylinder 1 litre VTEC turbo petrol engine introduced with this Mark 10 model. It manages 58.9 mpg on the combined cycle and 110 grams per kilometre of CO2, so job done. Well, job nearly done anyway. I mean, those readings are pretty much the same as you get from equivalent 1 litre Golf or Focus, but comparable 3-cylinder Vauxhall Astra and Peugeot 308 models can significantly improve on them. In the case of the Peugeot, by nearly 15%. Now that's down to weight. Honda says that this 10th generation Civic is 16 kilos lighter than its predecessor, but many variants still weigh in at either just above or just below the 1.3 tonne mark, which is quite a lot for a family hatch these days. For comparison, a Golf is about 70 kilos lighter, while a Peugeot 308 can tip the scales at over 200 kilos less. This Civic is, however, a slightly larger family hatch than any of the cars we've just mentioned, and inevitably there is a price to pay for that. At least this time around, it's not a hugely significant one. When it comes to the 1.5 litre VTEC Turbo Civic variant we're trying here, we're a little less inclined to take such a positive view. Here, the numbers returned, 48.7 mpg on the combined cycle and 133 grams per kilometre of CO2 aren't hugely different to those we quoted with reference to the old 1.8 litre iVTEC engine we tested on the previous generation version of this car. Presumably, since the new engine must surely be significantly cleaner and more frugal, this is down to that weight issue. If so, it's difficult to see what Honda can do about it. The 1.5, like the 1 litre VTEC turbo unit, can be ordered mated up to CVT automatic transmission, and the good news is that in both cases the effect on fuel and CO2 figures is minimal. As for diesel power, well, as we've said elsewhere in this review, the 1.6-litre ID.Tech 120 PS unit Honda offers in this car is essentially the same engine used in the previous generation model, so in this case you would anticipate that the fuel and CO2 returns to be much the same as before. Expect well under 100 grams per kilometre of CO2 and over 75 mpg on the combined cycle. And that's enough to facilitate an impressive potential single fuel tank range that would probably exceed 830 miles. Now that's enough to get an ID.Tech Civic from its Swindon factory birthplace to Munich in southern Germany without stopping. If, on the other hand, your chosen mode of transport for that trip was the top 2-litre petrol turbo Civic Type R hot hatch, well, you'd have to anticipate a number of stops along the way, given figures for that variant of 36.7 mpg on the combined cycle and 176 grams per kilometre of CO2. The returns of all the manual models are aided by the standard fitment of a stop and start system. Honda calls this idle stop, which cuts the engine when you don't need it, when you're sitting in heavy traffic or stopped at crossings and traffic lights, for example. There's also the usual gear shift indicator light on the dash, and if you've got the Honda Connect infotainment system, various fuel-related trip computer readouts that'll demonstrate how successful your recent efforts at Frugati have been. Going further than that requires driver cooperation, and that's something that the Japanese brand is seeking with 2 further systems borrowed from its planet-friendly hybrid development. First, there's Eco Assist, which uses coloured illuminated strips above the speedometer to advise users on how their driving style is affecting fuel economy. The lighting's green while the car's being driven efficiently, white green if you start to push on a bit, and just white during heavy acceleration or deceleration. That's an automatic feature, but Honda's other contribution to enviro-conscious motoring is something you actually have to select, this Econ system. Now, pushing this green button on the console between the seats activates a gentler throttle map and tweaks the air conditioning for greater efficiency. But when you want that all the time with perhaps a power button for pushing on, I mean, perhaps it all amounts to the same thing. At least I suppose you do feel green-fingered the way that Honda has configured it. Of course, when it comes to day-to-day running costs, there's plenty else to consider. The extent of expected depreciation, for example. Now, the good news here is that this 10th generation model hangs on to 9% more of its value than its predecessor, which was already quite a decent performer in this area. As a result, the Honda is amongst the best in the sector, with a residual value of 37% after 3 years and 60,000 miles for the 1-litre VTEC Turbo. That's around 8% better than most of its rivals, and the other petrol and diesel versions are similarly good at holding onto your cash. That may compensate to some extent for insurance costs, which may be a little higher than those of rivals. Where a Volkswagen Golf starts at Group 7 and a Peugeot 308 starts at Group 12, a base Civic 1-litre VTEC Turbo has a lowest insurance rating Group 15, although at least that doesn't rise with the trim levels. Upgrading into this 1.5-litre VTEC Turbo model will see that rating rise to Group 22. Expect the Type R variant to be rated at about Group 33. As for the warranty, well, that's the usual 3-year package, though in this case the coverage does last for up to 90,000 miles rather than the 60,000 mile cap imposed by most rivals. Servicing, that comes around every 12,000 miles or once a year, whichever comes soonest, and you can spread the cost of that with a fixed price scheme called 5. It includes 5 years worth of maintenance, an extended warranty for that period, and roadside assistance breakdown cover should the unexpected happen. Ultimately, what's important about this 10th generation Civic is the way it shows how Honda has changed. This is now a brand able to continually develop cars people might really want to buy, as opposed to models that many of them would merely find technically intriguing, and a company able to understand the wants and needs of people beyond its home shores. With this design, it's finally clear that in both these areas, at long last, Honda has got the message. Kaizen, the Japanese approach to continuous improvement, characterises every aspect of this model's development, or almost every aspect anyway. What's been lost along the way is the unique loading versatility for tall items that previous Civics offered, thanks to their clever magic seat setup. Now, we do miss that, and we think a lot of customers loyal to previous versions of this Honda will too, especially now that the Tourer Estate body style has been deleted. Still, the Japanese brand has to reach out beyond these people, and the payoff with this car's fresh interior configuration, space for more sophisticated suspension, delivering an exceptionally compliant standard of ride, may well give this interestingly orientated family hatch a wider appeal. We're less sure whether the styling will also have that effect, but if you like it, you'll probably love it. What's not in question is the huge step forward this car's taken beneath the bonnet. Both the mainstream VTEC turbo petrol engines more than make the grade, and it's been a long time since we've been able to say that about a Civic. There's a lot else we've been impressed with too. The huge boot, a brilliantly slick manual gearbox, and the sheer uncompromising purpose of the top Type R hot hatch variant. True, interior quality isn't quite a match for best-in-class rivals, but the cabin's now a lot easier to like, and it's a lot bigger inside than it used to be. Plus, of course, this car's built in Britain, for what that's worth. In short, this model at long last has come of age. Finally, a car with sense on its side, yet one that retains at least a little of the kind of Honda charisma that every Civic ought to have. It makes its segment a more interesting place.